April 15th, 1943. 32,000 feet above Wichita, Kansas, United States. The cold is an academic concept outside, a negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit reality that would instantly freeze exposed skin, but inside the cockpit it is almost comfortable. Major Ben R. Miller glances at his crew. They are not bundled in fleece and leather like the men in the old B-17 seconds. They are wearing light uniforms, moving freely in the spacious, pressurized cabin of the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. It is like flying inside an office building, a world away from the rattling, freezing gun tunnels of previous bombers. This is not just a new airplane. It is a vision of the future, a machine built to defy the natural limits of high-altitude flight. The air outside is thin, offering precious little resistance, which is exactly the point. The B-29 is designed to fly higher and faster than any enemy fighter can effectively reach. Look around this revolutionary flight deck. The bombardier and navigator are connected to the pilots by an interconnected series of pressurized compartments, an unprecedented luxury that minimizes crew fatigue on missions lasting over 16 hours. But the truly revolutionary aspect is not the comfort, it is the complexity of its defense. Forget manual turret cranks and exposed gunners. The B-29 is defended by a Central Fire Control System, CFCS. In the central section, the gunners sit at specialized sighting stations, looking through gyroscopic computing sights. They don't aim the guns directly. Instead, they input the enemy fighter's position and speed, and a primitive analog computer determines the necessary lead, sending electrical commands to 4 pairs of remote-controlled turrets scattered across the fuselage. These turrets, hidden beneath smooth, streamlined domes, track and fire with an accuracy human reflexes could never match at high speeds. The gunners are literally firing guns that are hundreds of feet away. Major Miller checks his gauges. The 4 immense Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines, each a monstrous 18-cylinder twin-row radial, capable of generating 2,200 horsepower, are humming powerfully. But even this early in testing, the engines are already a source of immense anxiety. They run hot, notoriously hot, a temperamental combination of brute force and intricate engineering that threatens to seize up or catch fire at the slightest provocation. The sheer scale of this machine is breathtaking. With a wingspan of 141 feet, it is designed to carry a 20,000-pound bomb load over extreme distances far deeper into enemy territory than any existing bomber. The B-29, designated in absolute secrecy, represented a leap over its predecessor, the B-17 Flying Fortress, that was less an evolution and more a revolution. This vast, pressurized, electronically controlled weapon was deemed essential to defeat Japan, an enemy protected by thousands of miles of ocean. However, achieving this revolution would come at a staggering cost, making it the most expensive weapons program of the entire war. The engineering hurdles were immense, and the price of failure was unthinkable. The B-29 was not merely an airplane. It was an industrial project of staggering scope and expense, dubbed by some as the Manhattan Project of Aviation. By 1944, the US government had poured over $3 billion into the B-29 program, more than the cost of the atomic bomb project itself. This unprecedented investment reflected the desperate strategic necessity for a bomber that could bypass the tyranny of distance in the Pacific. The challenge wasn't just designing the B-29, it was producing it. To meet the urgent demands of the war planners, the decision was made to manufacture the Superfortress simultaneously across 4 main assembly plants: Boeing in Wichita, Bell Aircraft in Marietta, Glen L., Martin in Omaha, and Fisher Body, General Motors, in Cleveland. This required the coordination of hundreds of thousands of workers, most of whom were new to aircraft manufacturing, and the rapid deployment of advanced, specialized tooling. The process was called the Wichita Massacre by Boeing executives, reflecting the brutal, non-stop pressure. The rush to production before the final design was perfected led to inevitable chaos. The B-29 was perhaps too advanced for the contemporary state of American manufacturing. Its complexity, particularly the pressurized cabin system and the elaborate central fire control system, CFCS, required tolerances and quality control that existing mass production techniques struggled to maintain. Production deadlines slipped repeatedly, leading to intense political pressure from Washington. The core of the initial crisis lay in those massive Wright R-3000-350 engines. These engines were the very lifeblood of the B-29, necessary to haul the heavy bomber up to its operational altitude. However, the design was plagued by chronic and often catastrophic overheating, primarily in the rear cylinder rows. This was exacerbated by the tight, streamlined engine cowlings necessary for high-speed flight, which restricted cooling air. Early test flights were terrifying, often ending in emergency landings or, tragically, fatal crashes caused by engine fires. The Army Air Forces, AAF, were so desperate to field the aircraft that they took the radical step of launching the Battle of Kansas in the spring of 1944. General Hap Arnold, commander of the AAF, personally ordered crews of mechanics, engineers, and manufacturing personnel to descend upon the assembly lines and air bases in Kansas to literally work around the clock, implementing modifications, fixing assembly errors, and debugging the hundreds of small, interlocking problems on newly delivered aircraft. Aircraft were pulled off the assembly line and immediately had engineers swarm over them, fixing flaws in the open air. This unprecedented, costly, and brutal effort finally ironed out enough of the crippling flaws to make the B-29 operational. The first B-29 seconds to enter combat were shipped directly to India to commence Operation Matterhorn, the strategically necessary, but logistically nightmarish, first phase of bombing Japan. The men who flew them knew they were piloting the most advanced machine in the world, but they also knew they were flying an experimental aircraft still fighting its own design and production demons. Spring 1944. The hastily debugged and still temperamental B-29 seconds were funneled into Operation Matterhorn, the most logistically audacious plan of the war's early phases. The mission was to strike the Japanese homeland, specifically the steel mills at Yawata from bases in China. This required first flying the bombers across the Atlantic, around Africa, and into airfields near Kharagpur, India. But the real logistical horror lay in the final approach. Operating from forward airfields constructed in Chengdu, China. To stage an attack from China, every single gallon of high-octane fuel, every spare part, and every one of the massive 500-pound bombs had to be ferried over the Himalayas, a treacherous air route known simply as the Hump. This was a mission often flown by the B-29 seconds themselves, stripping out their bomb bays to carry vital supplies. A B-29 carrying 10,000 gallons of fuel to China meant 10,000 fewer gallons of fuel to run a bombing mission from that base. The logistics crippled the operational effectiveness of the Superfortress. Imagine being a crew member on a Matterhorn mission. It is June 5th, 1944, the first major attack, targeting Bangkok railway yards. A shakedown raid before Yawata. The flight is endless, tense, and mostly empty sky. At 28,000 feet, the B-29 is mostly safe from Japanese fighters, but not from its own complex machinery. You are flying a multi-million-dollar weapon that is fundamentally trying to destroy itself. The Wright R-3000-350 engines are the constant, terrifying centerpiece of this early combat experience. Pilot Captain James K. Clark reported the sheer anxiety. "You didn't worry about zeros. You worried about fire." The engines continued to suffer severe overheating. The cramped rear cylinders, starved for cooling air, would often seize, leading to catastrophic engine failure or, worse, a searing engine fire that quickly threatened the wing structure and the immense fuel tanks. The crews, operating thousands of miles from fully equipped maintenance depots, often had to perform emergency repairs using cannibalized parts, praying that the patch job would hold up against the 16-hour round trip to Chengdu and back. When the B-29 seconds finally made their first raid on the Japanese home island of Yawata on June 15, 1944, The results were underwhelming. Of the 68 B-29 seconds launched from China, only 47 reached the target. Many aborted due to mechanical failure, and many more were lost not to enemy flak or fighters, but to the curse of the R-350. The long flights over the hump, the limited bomb loads imposed by the logistical train, and the relentless mechanical failures made the Matterhorn campaign a costly, inefficient, and often tragic learning experience. The AAF realized quickly that the B-29, while capable of the range, needed a stable, closer base of operations and complete dominance over its own internal engineering. The high price tag and operational complexity were proving too much for the logistics chain. They needed a new plan, one that would bring the Superfortress closer to its target and unleash its true, fire-breathing potential. That plan was already underway, far away on a chain of obscure Pacific islands. The logistical nightmare of the CBI theater proved that the B-29, in its current state, could not win the war against Japan from China. A much more robust staging area was required. The American military responded with a massive campaign to seize the Mariana Islands, Guam, Tinian, and Saipan in the summer of 1944. These islands, situated roughly 1,500 miles from the Japanese home islands, offered the perfect, secure, forward base for the new 20th Air Force. Gigantic airfields, capable of handling the Superfortress's massive weight, were carved out of the coral and limestone at a feverish pace. With the move to the Marianas in late 1944, the B-29 began its operational life anew, but it was still hampered by the lingering engine issues and the adopted high-altitude, precision bombing doctrine used successfully in Europe. Initially, raids were conducted from 30,000 feet, aiming for industrial targets like aircraft factories and arsenals. However, the results were persistently disappointing. High-altitude winds over Japan's mainland proved ferocious, often reaching 200 miles per hour, scattering the bombs and making precision impossible. The high altitude also further strained the temperamental R-350 engines. This operational frustration led to the dramatic intervention of Major General Curtis E. LeMay. A hard-driving, uncompromising commander, LeMay took over the XXI Bomber Command in January 1945 and quickly concluded that the existing doctrine was fatally flawed. He recognized that the B-29's true strength lay not just in its altitude, but in its ability to carry an overwhelming bomb load and its superior speed to evade the enemy. LeMay decided to discard the costly, ineffective, high-altitude precision bombing in favor of a devastating, low-altitude saturation campaign using incendiaries. LeMay's plan was radical and highly controversial. Strip the B-29 seconds of all excess weight, including the vulnerable and complex central fire control system and most of the defensive machine guns, retaining only the tail turret for defense. This reduced weight allowed the aircraft to carry a far greater payload of M69 incendiary clusters. Crucially, he ordered the bombers to attack at extremely low altitudes, sometimes as low as 5,000 to 8,000 feet, flying at night. The shift was terrifying. At that altitude, the B-29 seconds were fully exposed to ground fire and enemy night fighters. LeMay's order was blunt. If we don't succeed, they'll court-martial me. The first low-level fire raid, on Tokyo on the night of March 9–10, 1945, was one of the most destructive bombing missions in history. Flying in over the dense, wood and paper city, the B-29 seconds dropped thousands of incendiaries, creating a massive, uncontrollable firestorm. The heat was so intense that it created its own wind, a deadly inferno that incinerated 16 square miles of the city and killed an estimated 100,000 people, more casualties than would be inflicted by the initial atomic blast at Hiroshima. The Superfortress, once plagued by its own complexity, was now operating with terrifying simplicity and overwhelming destructive power. The war was entering its final, most brutal phase, spearheaded by this now reliable, monstrous bomber. Previous section. Text. The Superfortress, once plagued by its own complexity, was now operating with terrifying simplicity and overwhelming destructive power. The war was entering its final, most brutal phase, spearheaded by this now reliable, monstrous bomber. Section 5. The Ultimate Payload, the Silver Plate Missions, and the New Age of War. By the spring of 1945, the relentless, low-altitude firebombing campaign, orchestrated by Curtis LeMay, had devastated every major Japanese urban center, proving the B-29's capability to deliver overwhelming destruction deep into the enemy homeland. But even as the raids continued, a small, highly secretive unit operating out of the Marianas was preparing the B-29 for its true, world-altering purpose. This mission was codenamed Silver Plate. Silver Plate was a hyper-specialized modification program applied to approximately 15 B-29 seconds, necessary to carry the unique and unprecedented payloads of the Manhattan Project. The complexity of the atomic weapons, the little boy gun-type device, and the Fat Man implosion device meant the standard B-29 bomb bay was inadequate. The Silver Plate modifications included removing all defensive armament, even the tail turret, installing special pneumatic systems to open and close the massive bomb bay doors quickly, and installing custom bomb racks and hoisting equipment to handle the atomic bomb's immense size and weight, around 10,000 pounds. The aircraft were also stripped down for maximum speed and ceiling. The unit formed for this task was the 509th Composite Group, commanded by Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, Jr. Tibbets personally oversaw the modification and training, drilling his crews relentlessly in long-distance, high-altitude solo missions. The B-29 was already an intimidating technological marvel, but the Silver Plate variant was the pinnacle of wartime engineering, a single aircraft system capable of delivering the final blow. Imagine the eerie calm of their practice missions from Tinian. Instead of flying in massive formations, the Silver Plate B-29 seconds flew alone, often carrying specialized, inert replicas of the bombs known as pumpkins. The mission profiles were extremely specific. Fly at 30,000 feet, drop the weapon, and execute a violent, high-G 155-degree turn away from the blast zone to escape the anticipated shockwave. The crews knew they were carrying a weapon of incomparable power, but its true effect was beyond human comprehension. This secret preparation culminated on the morning of August 6, 1945. Colonel Tibbets, flying the specially named B-29 Enola Gay, took off from North Field, Tinian, bound for Hiroshima. The mission embodied the very essence of the Superfortress design: extreme range, high-altitude capability, and the capacity to carry a revolutionary payload. At 8:15 a.m., the single bomb, Little Boy, was released. The resulting blast fundamentally changed the nature of warfare, demonstrating the capacity of a single aircraft, the B-29 Superfortress, to render entire cities obsolete as strategic targets. The most expensive weapons system of the war had delivered the final, devastating punch, forcing a geopolitical reckoning and forever separating the era of conventional conflict from the age of nuclear power. The B-29 was no longer just a bomber. It was the delivery vehicle for a new, terrible global reality. The dropping of the second atomic bomb on Nagasaki 3 days later, carried by the B-29 Boxcar, effectively sealed Japan's fate and brought World War II to its conclusion. The sheer power of the weapons, delivered by the B-29, overshadowed the bomber's conventional achievements, but its legacy as a technological and strategic marvel remained profound and long-lasting. The B-29 Superfortress succeeded because its advanced design fulfilled its specific mandate: to bypass the vast distances and defenses of the Pacific Theater. While the initial operational phase was plagued by the high cost and mechanical complexity, particularly the R-3350 engines, which required constant, dedicated maintenance, the aircraft matured into an unbeatable platform. Its high cruising altitude and speed rendered it largely impervious to Japanese fighter interception. A Japanese fighter pilot attempting to intercept a B-29 at 30,000 feet faced freezing temperatures, poor visibility, and an aircraft that was often too fast to catch. The B-29's remote-controlled central fire control system, despite its complexity, offered concentrated defensive firepower that made head-on attacks suicidal for interceptors. The Superfortress forever changed the economics of air power. Its enormous development cost more than any other single weapon system of the war, set a precedent for the massive, multi-billion-dollar aerospace programs that would define the Cold War. It introduced essential innovations that became standard for all future long-range military and even civilian aviation. Pressurized cabins for crew comfort and efficiency, remote-controlled gun turrets for aerodynamic efficiency and concentrated defense, and intercooler technology to manage the extreme heat of high-performance engines. The B-29 essentially laid the groundwork for the jet age, proving that massive aircraft could be built to operate reliably at the edge of the atmosphere. After the war, the B-29 remained the backbone of the Strategic Air Command, serving as the first true intercontinental bomber platform for the nascent nuclear deterrent force. It was the only aircraft capable of carrying the heavy, early atomic devices, and it played a crucial role in the Berlin airlift. Its successor, the heavily modified B-50 Superfortress, and the iconic Boeing B-52 Stratofortress that followed, owed their fundamental design concepts and philosophical approach to the lessons learned and the enormous costs incurred during the B-29 program. The B-29 Superfortress was a machine that defied its time, demanding technological solutions that were often only barely within reach. It was costly, difficult, and nearly impossible to build. Yet it fulfilled its terrible destiny, delivering a level of destruction that permanently reshaped the geopolitical landscape. It was the most technologically advanced bomber of its generation, and its ultimate payload ensures that the story of the B-29 will never be confined to history. It is the story of how modern warfare began,